Hi, everybody. Welcome to Iowa Ideas. We're so excited to be here and discussing public art, the future, and what is going on currently. Thanks to ITC Midwest for sponsoring this session. And we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Katie Hallman. I am the executive director with Theater Cedar Rapids in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I would love for my panelists joining me today to go ahead and introduce themselves and give us some background into why you are connected and how you're connected to public art efforts.
Go ahead, Katie.
Okay, I'm Katie Mason. I'm with the city of Coon Rapids. I am employed by the city, but I am also the Main Street Coon Rapids Executive Director. And as in those roles, I oversee community development as well as downtown revitalization efforts. And we have been working on including public art in our downtown revitalization efforts for the last 5 years pretty heavily. Coon Rapids is a community of 1,300, so we are on the smaller side of communities, but we've worked really hard to make sure that we integrate art into our downtown.
And I am Scott Takis. I own Underground Art Studios in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I'm an artist and a muralist. I do all kinds of different artwork. I have a small team of artists, and we've done some pieces here in Cedar Rapids that some of you may have seen, and other places here in the U.S. And I love to be a part of the production of the art and working with clients of all different kinds, from groups of people to individuals, private to business, cities, towns, whatever. So I feel like I'm excited to be here, and I'm glad that you all joined us today to talk about this.
Awesome. Well, as I said, I'm Katie Hallman. I had the pleasure of meeting Scott and Katie representing elder millennials, right, Katie? With our names here on this call. And I said to them, I said, you might wonder why I'm here. And part of it is I've really enjoyed being a part of some of the planning meetings that go into Iowa Ideas. And this is such a wonderful event and collaborative conversation setting. But I come by public art honestly through my mom and her work extensively in the public art sector in Eastern Iowa. But in my role as leading the largest nonprofit theater in the state and the privilege of having a downtown venue that is really what would we call it? It's just a centering force for Third Street. Thinking about art's impact in our everyday life is really essential. And I think I often say, and I am not unique in saying this, if it weren't for public art, we would just be walking around looking at concrete boxes. Art is everywhere. Art is in architecture, and it's often passive as well as active and engaging. So in preparation for this conversation today, Scott and Katie and I talked about three things. How on earth does public art get done? And what are the challenges therein? What do we need in terms of executing public art successfully? And then what are the demands that we are seeing in Iowa as we move forward, not to mention kind of the American culture writ large. So as Katie mentioned, she's representing a town of about 1,300 people. And Katie, can you talk with us a bit about your role and how you are assessing the need for an execution of public art in your community?
Sure. So our approach to public art is about beautification and how do we integrate art into the amenities that we need in our downtown. So for instance, we looked at our downtown and said, what are some of the areas that are less attractive? And how can we use art to make them more appealing? So one of our first very large scale projects was we have two grain bins at the end of our retail district, which also happens to be one of the entrances and gateways to our retail district. So we chose that as a target area to beautify by putting a mural in each of the two grain bins that's 360 degrees so that No matter what direction you come at those grain bins, you have a large mural to look at. And, we have a coffee shop right across the way that looked out on those. And so now it gives those customers something enjoyable to look at and keeps them in that coffee shop longer because the experience is warmer, even if they don't consciously think, oh, I'm just going to sit here and look across the street. It's just a more inviting atmosphere. And so that's kind of our approach to art.
I think that's really interesting, and I appreciated learning yesterday about how responsive you have been to just observe, making observations in your community, just like the grain bins, and understanding that, hey, there's a chance for there to be economic enhancement if only we can make this visually appealing. What can we do? What can we do to add interest? Scott, in your art, in your work as an artist, and how you're engaged, how do projects come to you, and how do you evaluate them?
Well, they come to me in a variety of ways. Oftentimes, you get a private somebody that has a building or a business, and they will contact me, knowing that I know I've been in the community, or they may have seen my work somewhere. And some of that I think comes from experience with working with groups of people and more of a contractor, if you will. So I can assess projects and see them for large or small and what may need to be done before we even do the artwork. So I think that the private people may call on me, but I also have Murals and More and some of the other groups of people out there that might need an artist. They'll do a call for artists, whether they put that on social media somewhere. And so they're out there. There's work that's out there, and it can come in a variety of different ways. So when you say there's a call for artists, you can look into that and you can present your work. You can read through it and see how big is the project. You can look at the budgeting, you can look at the area, the location. There might or might not be a topic involved. And so the work, it's out there and it comes in a variety of different ways, whether people contact me or sometimes I will seek it out. Other times other people see opportunities and they might think of me and they'll send it, to the artist and say, hey, there's opportunities, you guys you should, chime in on this. Is this something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, I'm so we definitely are going to talk about murals, and that was part of the grounding force of this conversation. It was kind of like, what's life beyond murals? What is it? And I love murals. I'm a mural stan. But I do, and I want to talk about what it takes to get your team together, Scott. So I'm going to come back, but Katie, I'd love for you to talk about the everyday art. I think it seems like you've done some really interesting things in Coon Rapids, assessing everyday objects, kind of like the grain bins. But can you talk about other ways that you've activated art?
Yes, absolutely. So our retail district is only about 3 blocks wide and 2 blocks in length, or north and south. And so we don't have a lot of area to work within. So we find that we integrate art into the amenities. So for instance, when we added planters downtown and we made custom planters and had our city's logo, which has a very artistic symbol in it, engraved into those planters. And then we took it a step farther and decided that we needed to have outdoor ashtrays fabricated and put in front of our restaurants and our bars. Instead of having buckets of sand outside, we wanted something more appealing. And so what we did is we fabricated ashtray holders that look exactly like our planters, but in the miniature, and made sure that we laser cut then our logo and our artwork into that. We did the same thing with bike racks. We incorporated laser cut images into our bike racks and the benches that we have downtown. And so we find these little opportunities to, I don't want to say sneak art in, but that's kind of what we're doing, integrating art into things that people need in the downtown.
I Again, and we talked about this a little yesterday, but art in the everyday. I mean, that I think makes the most. Uh, really exciting kind of emotional impact that's subconscious. I want to pause for just a second. We've had another panelist join us, Josh Schomburger from Think Iowa City. Thank you so much, Josh. And for coming in at the last minute. I promise we'll take good care of you. We're talking today, about public art, the current and the future. And what we've talked about so far, Josh, is really how are we getting these things executed? And I know that you've just been a part of a project called Herky on Parade. I would love to know, and we would love to know more about how this project, I think really talking about the tactics, how on earth do we get public art done? Who called upon you all to bring that project together, and yeah, talk to me a little bit about the timeline and engagement process and funding.
Yeah, well, appreciate the opportunity to be here, and hello, Scott.
Hey,
I know
Josh.
Scott well. Yeah, Monica Nieves was the head of our artist committee, one of the heads for Herky on Parade, and she called just a few hours ago and has a bad migraine, so I'm pinch hitting. Sorry for not the pretty background.
It's okay.
But Herky on Parade really was born out of back in 1998. Chicago introduced Cows on Parade and was the first city in North America to put these sort of fiberglass animals and pieces of art on the street in all different orientations. And I saw that. I was working at the bureau in Cedar Rapids at the time, and me and a couple others decided we wanted to give that a shot and did American Gothic overalls all over in 2001. And then shortly after that, I came down here and said, "Hey, let's try it with the most favorite mascot in the state." No offense to Cy, I have a son that goes there, so I'm an Iowa State guy too. But let's put Herky on Parade. We did it in '04. It was magic from the beginning, and it was magic from the beginning because of the artists. We put a call for entries out through the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs, through every database we could get. And we had hundreds and hundreds of submissions for artists that wanted to have a little fun and present Herky in a unique way. And I swore after '04 I would never do that again. And then 10 years later, I forgot. I did it again. And now we're here 20 years later. And Scott has done multiple Herkies, and he is by far and away, no offense to anybody else, my favorite artist. He took it
Thank you.
personally upon himself to do one special for me. And he's about the best of the best, not only in the state, but in the country.
So
Thank
I want to pause you here, and that is amazing. And Scott, you have to. I need pictures, and I'm just meeting all of you. I can't wait. I can't wait to see it. I'm such a fan of this type of work. I think because of the fun that it brings, the joy. I think art. We're so stuffy, right? I mean, we're inaccessible. We don't know how to touch art. It's just like I mean, again, I talked about how I was raised. I was raised when I had sick days. I'm at home right now with a sick son. When I had sick days, I was under my mom's desk at the University of Iowa Museum of Art. And so I did my homework in front of the Pollock. That's crazy. Like
you.
that is not, you know what I mean? I think about that. And so to me, art doesn't have that barrier to access. And so I have to challenge myself in our work to kind of challenge where the barriers are. And Herky on Parade is a great example of going barrierless, right? And making things touchable. I want to know from Scott's perspective how that gets done and how it's sustainable. But Josh, and then I want to ask about how do you navigate all those people? And this goes to Katie too. We have donors, we have civic entities, we have educational entities, we have a lot of people with varied interests, and managing interpersonal relationships around something as vulnerable as art. It makes people feel things that they aren't expecting, and wow, do they behave in certain unexpected ways. So let's talk about the relationship management. And Katie, can you kick us off a little bit with your experience, how you're managing kind of the civic and artist
Sure.
priorities?
So in Coon Rapids, and specifically in our downtown, we do have design guidelines that help all of our building owners and businesses treat their buildings with historic preservation in mind whenever they make any alterations to the building. And we made sure to include art in that. And we don't want to stifle creative thoughts or tell people how the art is going to look, but we ask but we do a lot of education. We do a lot of education specifically about the medium that they use. And, we have a lot of historic brick buildings. So we work with them more along the lines of, well, if you are going to put paint on your building, here are the parameters in which you can do it. And then we also have a permitting process just to make sure that no one does anything lewd or inappropriate in our downtown. But in general, we just have open conversations when someone says, I'd like to do this art installment or this mural on my building. And we ask them, what are your intentions? What are you trying to accomplish with it? And then ask for a sketch or a rendering just to make sure that it's appropriate within the context of our historic preservation efforts.
And are you this, Katie, in your layout, are you the seat that's going to check off things and say, yep, I'm good with this? Who's the authority?
We have a two-step process. So yes, people start with me and we have a design review committee. So there's a group of people who will look at it and say, yes, we feel comfortable with it. And then ultimately it's the city council who makes the decision. But we have a very good working relationship with our city council so that by the time a project has gotten to them, they feel comfortable that we have made sure that everything is appropriate and above board.
Yeah, and fitting with that makes sense. Josh and Scott, how many Herkies are there first?
This time around, there were 102,
Okay.
and we're still making a couple, unfortunately.
So
Just operationally.
I'm gonna make a guess here that you probably had 75 sponsors for those 102, and you had some civic support, university support. And think Iowa City, this is an initiative for you all. Josh, from your seat, how did you navigate the priorities and parameters? And Scott, from your seat, the same question.
You go first, Scott. I've talked already. I got to hear you.
Mine's pretty easy, really. It when you talk about the parameters and priorities, for me, it's always brought to me. That's already usually figured out for the most part, because from the artist's perspective, I take inspiration from the people that are requesting the artwork, requesting the piece to be done. And so in this case, working with Josh, he already had a theme in mind. And so, from my perspective, that's really what I focus on. I listen, and I also have to try to interject what I think is good and right and careful so that the majority of the people will enjoy the artwork. You want to, be mindful of that. So from my perspective, I let the people kind of tell me what they're after, and then I'll create something that I think the majority of the people will enjoy, and the owner or the person that's contracting the artwork is proud to have that piece.
What do you feel like, Scott, from the artist perspective? We talked a little bit about this yesterday. The coaching and education you have to do. I'm an owner and I want rhinestone. I want a rhinestone Herky. That's just what I want. And I want it to be, and I don't care about the weather or whatever. I'm gonna use the glue. I'm gonna use Elmer's glue rhinestones. That's what I want.
Yeah.
So how do you get your work done, and what are the parameters you find that you're kind of educating on most often?
Well, materials, I think, are important, and we start with that right from the get-go, so that people know these are the materials that I choose to work with, and this is why. I definitely tend to lean into the stuff that I know is tried and true. Also, you brought up the rhinestones, and I know you probably just pulled that out of thin air, but it's a great example because not only does that tend to, be maybe a little bit more vulnerable in the weather, but it becomes incredibly time consuming. And as the artist, I think for some artists, it's very difficult for them to have that voice and say no, or say, gosh, I don't know, this is going to be tough. So there's a balancing act between the amount of work that you need to do and the budget that's set for each project, whatever you're working on. So, yeah, there needs to be some filtration through my mind and knowing what the work's going to be, and then just communication, really just
Mhm.
communication, talking when you see something that might be an issue, you bring it up. Herky's a good example. There was a lot of different elements brought to it, and some of the Herkies that I've done in the past, I had a flag that I put on one. I wanted to make sure that that fabric was, weather, resistant. And so, yeah, you have to be mindful about what you're doing and know where they're going and what they're going to be used for.
What do you think about in terms of I mean, art can be as ephemeral as we want, right? And there are timelines, there are timestamps, especially to art that's exposed to the elements. It's not there. I'll punctuate there. How are you thinking? What do you find to be your kind of standard? If let's say in a mural space, Scott, are you looking at an estimated lifespan and are you articulating that? Or does it come from the person sponsoring versus a Herkion parade? And I'll need some guidance here because I wish all the Grant Wood statues are still up. I love them so much, but I understand they can't be up forever. So how long, tell me about the lifeline of these different types of projects.
Well, oftentimes I'll do, I mean, I know the materials that I like to use, and they are, a lot of them are, to be honest, some of them are even unattainable to use for some of the budgets that are out there. And that's just a fact. The stuff is just, it's expensive. But, you brought up the Grant Wood. The Grant Wood piece that I did is still down at Iowa Brewing. It
Yeah.
sits
Oh yeah, I love
outside.
it.
It's been there for a very, very, very long time, and it's not faded or whatnot. That's because I upgraded when we did the project, and I educated, the people that were doing this and said, this is what I think would be best. I still leave it up to them as a choice. Um, you know, uh, it's funny, artwork, the murals, public art, is it here to stay? That has a lot to do with it, is,
Right.
the materials that are used. And you got to
Yeah.
make sure that if you're gonna, the amount of time that it takes me to do something is usually about the same, whether I'm using a material that'll last 5 years or a material that'll last 10 years. And sometimes projects have different meanings for different people. They just kind of want it for now, and they want it to do what they want it to do now, but it doesn't really need to last forever. But I'm a big fan of seeing, like, American Pickers and some of these shows where you see them finding really old folk art, really old pieces of art, and it held the test of time. And that has to do with just the thoughtfulness and the materials that people used.
Makes me think of all the, I mean, we've all seen and stayed. I've bet maybe you've stayed in a hotel where the original advertisement is on the wall still, with the
Yeah.
exposed brick and things like that. And that's such a treasure. I'm wondering, Josh, from your seat, and just forgive my ignorance, and how many public art projects is this kind of a standard operating goal for Think Iowa City from your seat? Are you engaging in multiple public art projects? Is this a priority for Think Iowa City?
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, Herkian Parade is obviously incredibly visible, and there's just so many touch points with that it just makes it that visible. But we have been a big supporter of public art, particularly murals. Anytime the downtown district has brought in the sculpture pieces or the recent art exhibits the last 2 years, we've funded that. It's an accessible and quality of life touch point that is available for everybody. And I just think we appreciate that. We see value in it. Um, but Herkian Parade, I think going back to your earlier question, one of the keys there and balancing between sponsors, owners technically, and artists is really we spend probably more time just making sure the sponsors stay out of the way. I mean, there's value associated with that, but let the artists create and be the art. I think Scott will attest that when he asked me a few times about what I was trying to do, I just gave him a theme, but I didn't want to give him any direction outside of maybe one or two little things I hope he would incorporate. But I know him and I know what he's capable of, and I just wanted him to go be Scott Takis and have it be that piece. And that's true with every one of these artists. So there's a little balancing act, but at the end, they're all delivered. They're all home runs, and the sponsor just, enjoys the heck out of it and said, "Oh, thanks for, uh, talking me down, telling me to be quiet a little bit and let them do what they do."
I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the hardest things to do from our seats, and this kind of flips into kind of the nonprofit and civic world as well. I mean, you all well know, and I'm probably people listening do too, but sponsorship dollars don't touch the project cost in terms. I mean, the total oftentimes, and I'm not sure exactly for Herky on Parade, and you don't need to share details, but it's this relationship management of advocacy and exposure and friendship and enthusiasm. The dollar amount. Is only one piece of that. So congratulations on navigating that, and that's
Yeah, I think
exhaustive
the other
work.
thing, you run into sometimes too is people's definition of art. Every time we've done Herky on Parade, I have at least one or two. I would politely define them as highbrow art experts that reach out to me and say this isn't art and da 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 da, and I just could not disagree more. I mean, uh, art is in many ways Herky on Parade meets people where they're at with art, and they start to develop an appreciation, and then they learn more about art. And that has been proven more times. And Herky on Parade is unique. We just wrapped it and we're giving $95,000 out, which was all the proceeds for Herky on Parade. And we're giving it to the 3 school districts for K through 12 art education programs.
I love it.
It's completely cyclical. And, um, but sometimes you do get people, and I have to respond to those and say, I'm sorry you feel that way, but thousands and thousands of families that are walking around making lines to get their photos would probably define it as art for them.
There absolutely. There's no shame. What we in our house we say there are no guilty pleasures and there's no required reading. That's kind of our like that's because art when you feel something, that's what matters, and that's the transformative power I think that we're all aligned on. Of course, like it's listen, even the people who say they're mad about it, it's that great. That's
Yeah.
kind of the point.
Yeah, critical
Whatever.
discourse should be revered.
Right. It's like it's okay as long as something made you think or feel something. That's great. You've developed a perspective. Then why not? Scott, what does it feel like to see your art when you drive down the road that you've done? How is that? That's not a common occurrence for
It's
artists.
that's a great question. Um, it actually feels really great because
Yeah.
as I see it, sometimes I might even forget it's there, or and you see it, to me it feels great because I'm usually removed. uh Enough time has passed where I'm not thinking about maybe some of the struggles with the stuff that was hard about that project. I have a lot of pride in what I do, and I am really the type of personality that when I do a piece, it's really, I mean, I can listen to Josh and get his opinion on what he wants to do on it, and I ask those questions to be sure that I'm going to find success, which to me is to make him happy and make sure that he's like, yeah, I love it. But then I have expectations that are usually kind of ridiculous in terms of quality and just visually stimulating. And so, yeah, when I see a piece that I did, I usually can look back at it and think, wow, that turned out really good. There's, a few times when I think I might have done that a little differently now that I see it from this angle or whatever. But no, I oftentimes think about when I see a piece, I will think about the people that have talked to me about it. So I'll immediately think about who hired me to do it and the relationship that we now have because of it. Or, lots of people, especially the outdoor public murals, they don't go up overnight. They take time. And when you do that and you're there and you're working, the neighborhood comes out. You meet the neighbors, I'm friends with some of the neighbors from down by the Sacred Cow and that neighborhood that would come out, walk their dog, or they would just come to see progress, ask questions about it. So, it's a lot of it is people, just relationships and feelings. I did a mural at the Fix Salon, and one day there was a couple that came all the way from, and about 2 hour drive, but they came just because they heard about this mural and they wanted to see it. And, we end up having conversations about how they met and, the crazy life that they have together, and they're traveling, and they just they go around and they look at art, look at murals, and that's what they do. So there's a lot of people out there that they love this stuff. And I work in my studio every day, and I stay busy and I enjoy the work. I mail a lot of stuff out, but to be in the public and be working on a wall in a town where the people come out and talk to you, that's great. I love that.
So cool. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to shift a little bit to where we're going. I think the question is less whether or not public art is here to stay. I think let's just check that off. I think yes, public art in some form. Yes, yes. This isn't new, and it's not, and it's constantly evolving. I'm really curious about what evolution you are seeing from your seat. So maybe a place to start. Katie, as you all have come up with your specific plans for Coon Rapids and you look at your region, what regions are aspirational? Do you get inspiration from other towns? Do you have guideposts of kind of where you want to go?
Yeah, so we are a Main Street community, which means we're connected to a network of 55 other Main Street communities. And we meet 3 times a year at some different workshops. And whenever we do that, whatever community we're in, we tour. And there's almost always one tour that is just about art. And so it's such a great opportunity to walk around and see how other people are incorporating art into their downtowns and the different mediums that they're using. Or, I just recently I learned about wheat paste murals, and that's something that's very temporary, but very applicable to some of our anniversaries that are coming up in our community, or some big celebrations that are coming up. And so I guess from my standpoint, my connection is really to other Main Street communities and that network of learning from each other and finding new opportunities to integrate art into our revitalization efforts.
It's so amazing once you kind of dig under, and I don't think, well, I don't know. You don't know until you know. You don't know until you know that there are Main Street organizations and different how the EAs work and cities work. There's so much intricacy and support. It sounds like that's really lovely. Josh, I'm wondering from your seat at Think Iowa City, is there a regional future for public art, do you think? And what do you all look to as aspirational or kind of standard bearers and ways that you find inspiring for where things are going?
It's a good question. I don't know that I'm totally expert to answer that because it's not 100% our focus, but I'll sort of try. First off, I think, Katie, you should do wheat pasting. We do a lot of it here, and people love it, and it's very easy, and it does
What is
very
it?
wheat pasting.
Great.
It's on the side of buildings, and we pop them up at special events, and they're a lot of fun. I think, to answer that question, I'm probably not going to answer it perfectly, but
That's fine. There's no
the one role we can play and we can continue to play is really just advocacy and awareness. And, I was just in a meeting recently with the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. And are you there? Yep. Sorry. And
I'm so sorry. I guess we're all evolving right now.
And, I recognize like in these new construction budgets and stuff, they have a certain percentage that's mandated in there that, 5% or something of the construction budget has to be dedicated towards public art within the facility. And the more and more I think people can do that, and I know we did it when I was involved in building the Extreme Arena and Green State Family Fieldhouse. We were particular that we wanted local art in there, and so we hired Thomas Agron, who's a well-known muralist here in Iowa City, and we did quite a few murals in there. And I just think the more interaction and ability for people to have an experience within an experience, and to learn more about local artists, and you can and the stories that come through the art, whether they be history or cultural or whatever. That's where I see our role is. Regionally, we have incredible partners. We're very fortunate here in Eastern Iowa between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City to have just a potpourri of incredible talent and museums. And so the more and more we can align, but not only, I mean, advocate, but not only, but then also kind of mandate through some of our funding in our grants and say, listen, if we do have, the control of some purse strings, but in order for this project to move forward, we want to understand what the art component is. So we keep doing that. Hopefully we move the needle a little bit more and more from those part of the world that we operate.
That's wonderful to know. I thank you for sharing that. And again, this is like the internal stuff that you don't always think about or don't always have purview into unless you sit in your seat about the requirements that we might be facing. Um, Scott, what do you think in terms of the evolution of art? And we talked a little bit about this in advance, but um, we're seeing what do our cities need and what do we need to be thinking about in terms of infrastructure support for public art? I'm wondering, none of us have a crystal ball here, unfortunately. Um, are we going to need to be ready to support more tech, more? Do we need to be thinking about power? Do we need to be thinking about all these different things? Of course, like I hope and believe there will always be a place for paint and sculpture. But are demands moving? Are you seeing more electric kind of integration
I,
needs?
I would say there's requests for it. Some of the bigger cities where there's been things that have there's a lot of funding for certain projects are put together, and then the rest of us see that and think, oh my gosh, that'd be neat. I'd like to see that. One of those is VR, virtual reality, coming in into place where I've had a few requests for that and have done some research to learn that it's doable. It's not super affordable right now, but I can see that coming as our technology continues to, grow and expand. But to see some of these murals where they're still painting them on and they're still, designing them and working with the people that are requesting the mural work and um, painting the mural on the wall, but then they're putting together virtual reality where you can use your device, your phone, or go to the mural location, and there's usually a little spot. There might be a QR code there where you can, put your phone up to the QR code, and it opens up this um, opportunity that now you can kind of, have the mural be on your phone, and you can manipulate parts of it. You can, move things around, or maybe there's just a little video that plays that works with the mural. So that was really kind of exciting to see that happen. And at first I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it. I thought it was neat and exciting, but since I have had the opportunity to really design some of those and think about them for proposals, it's pretty neat. It really is, and I could see there being more of that. Um, with the generations coming up, my kids, for example, they like art, they see art, it's cool. Well, if they can react with it with their phone, they're going to try it. They're going to want to see what that's like. They're going to experience that. Um, so I think that's what I see is some more of that virtual reality. When you talk about maybe, the wheat pasting, which I think is awesome. I also can see, projections where people could just use projections and use that to enhance areas of the city, you know, that can be interchangeable, and different artists, different pieces can be projected up and just on display, and they change. Um, but I'm kind of old school. I like the paintbrush and that as things, age over time, they look super cool for a long time, becomes landmark. And um, but I'm excited to see what happens in the future. But I think it is definitely here to stay.
I think so. I'm taking notes on all the things, Josh. You told me wheat pasting, projection. I was thinking about the Iowa Theater building downtown. We got a lot of square footage on the outside. I think um, how do you get what would you all say to folks who are interested in pursuing a public art project on their personal building, or they see an opportunity in their community? But let's just say if you own something or you see something, how would you move that along? And what are we let's talk about money. I mean, I've been quoted, for instance, I mean, Murals and More is a wonderful organization here in Cedar Rapids, and we'll be doing some work with them. So I'm somewhat familiar with, but these, with the cost of things, and these are significant. Artists deserve to be paid. The materials are expensive if we want them to last. So we're easily talking about five-figure projects, most often 10,000, 20,000 upwards. So first thing is, Katie, in your community, I mean, thinking about the grain bins, how did that get done? And how would
Yeah.
someone get something like that done again?
Yeah, so that took us 3 years to find the financing for it. And so that was a combination of, there are grants available. We weren't as successful with grants as we were private donations. And so we did just spend 3 years working on campaigns for funding. We did everything as small as we asked the community. We find that sometimes when we ask people to donate to a kind of a large project where they don't necessarily know exactly how their money would be spent if they gave to it, they're less likely to give. So in ours, we just ask people, would you buy us a gallon of paint? A gallon of paint, let's say, costs $50. So if you give us $50, you're buying a gallon of paint. How many gallons of paint were you willing to buy? And that actually allowed a lot of people at a lower level to invest in the mural, and it was what kind of put us over the edge in our campaign. But we just had to find a lot of different funding opportunities to stack to be able to do the big mural that we did. Some of our smaller projects, for instance, one of our most recent ones, we had a building that was derelict. It was in bad shape. There were no windows. The windows had been boarded up. So we decided that our Main Street nonprofit would just donate the money to have signs put in the windows, but those signs were art. So instead of having a piece of plywood in an empty window, we put art. And we were able to just do some cost sharing between the building owner and our nonprofit. And so oftentimes we do come in as a nonprofit and cost share with the building owners who are working on projects.
Yes. What about from your seat, Josh, as you see these projects come up? How are things getting done in your community, and what guidance would you give to someone who either owns a property, or if they're an artist that's interested in getting involved in executing a project?
Yeah, I think the first thing is fortunately that we're all Iowans, and so everybody on this call is going to be more than happy to pick up the phone and help you talk you through your project and give you some ideas. Certainly, I'm sure Katie will do that. And grain bin art, I mean, another one that's kind of close to her is what they did in Fort Dodge is amazing. I mean, those grain bins, and
Yeah.
so there's a lot of really good examples and people that have had some great success, and that's where I would start if I was wanting to do something like that, is to call Katie or the folks in Fort Dodge. Money is always the deal, the challenge. And unfortunately, much like many other parts of our arts and culture community, it just gets harder and harder. But I just try to reiterate, when you're talking about business and economic development, the first thing that a lot of these companies and organizations are looking for when they're making decisions are in recruiting businesses or retention, keeping employees here. The top of the list on every single survey is quality of life. And so these sort of artistic murals and elements of public art add tremendous value and are a huge part of that. They're as important as trails and some of these other components of quality of life. So each project is a little bit different. Certainly, there are ways when you could get sponsorship, but there are also other ways you can work with municipalities. Depending on the size, they may have a fund through their hotel motel tax allocation that can be used for public art. It's just different for each one. And so I think it's just a matter, just like the artists, of us being creative and trying to find solutions and figuring out how to get to yes, as opposed to just saying, no, we can't find a way to get $10,000. That's crazy. As it relates to the cost, I tend to want to let the artist lead first in that dance of negotiation because I don't want to offend and I know what's worth their time. And sometimes it's pretty easy to undervalue um, this sort of work when you're looking at, okay, can you paint a picture on the wall? I mean, some people just think that way when they have no business going how hard it is to think that to do that sort of work and the skill that it takes to actually pull that off. So there's significant value there, and it should be treated as such and looked that way.
I'd piggyback on that when we were trying to finance our grain bins. Sometimes a lot of times we have to be creative and think outside the box. And so for one of the funding things that we needed to do was our artist didn't have a lift to be able to reach the top of, or even halfway up the grain bins. So finding someone local who would donate and provide an in-kind value of the lift. Someone else who donated the fuel for it. Sometimes it's not actual dollars that they give, but it's something in kind that helps us stack that to get to the finish line.
Yeah. Yeah, I look at some of the work that I've done, and that's kind of how it's been. That you'll go and speak with somebody and they're excited about it and they have a group of people that want to do this, but they'll just get the information. What's it going to take? What are we looking at for a price? So from the artist perspective, I usually go by square footage. And, you look at a very large building, say that needs to be muraled. Well, sometimes it also needs to be tuck pointed.
Mm-hmm.
And, gosh, I could paint that and I get it. You want it to look better than it does. But the reality of it is you probably should do some tuck pointing first, because if this mural turns out as beautiful as I think it's going to, you don't want to have repairs made and then how you blend that back in.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see oftentimes where people will come forward and say, well, I can tuck point, or my son and I, we know how to do tuck pointing. We'll take care of that part of it. And someone else will donate a lift, and it does. The communities come together and they figure it out. But as far as artwork goes, I break that into square footage oftentimes when it comes to murals, and I try to put a price per square foot that can be negotiated and can be higher or lower depending on the content. So if something is, say, really close to photorealistic, and that's kind of what it needs to be to really be wowing, well, then that's going to take a lot more time to produce something like that versus something that might be more of a sketch, line art, something that's a little simpler. Your square footage price will be lower. So there's options. We can't hear you.
Kate, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
I think you're muted.
She's just saying how great both of you are as panelists.
Yeah.
And
I can't hear her. Can you guys hear her?
No.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
How's Coon Rapids today? That's pretty close to Templeton, right?
We are, yes.
Yeah, I've been through there, I think, on Ragbri. Ragbri passed through town, maybe?
Wonderful. Ragbri was here in 2018.
Yeah, I
Yes.
remember it. Guthrie Senny, that's probably close to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You are in the right area. Yes.
Yeah, some good people over there.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, I'm so sorry that I lost my audio and visual there um, for a moment. But as we're kind of coming up on time, and I missed out on hearing some of that. What I wanted to ask you all is, what's your favorite piece of public art that you have seen, and not limited to this region, and why do you love it? What is something that you pass on the street and brings you a lot of joy? I'll say, Scott, being able to drive by Fix Salon with some frequency here in the community. Boy, I love it. I love seeing Lucille Ball in that setting, and I just think it's an amazing I think it's an amazing work of art. But also, I just had the opportunity to be in New York City, where my husband and I used to live, and they've just launched this amazing Elephants on Parade experience that's truly unreal. Do you all have experiences with art in the wild that really just light your fire?
I would have to say the Fix Salon mural for me. I know it's it might sound, well, of course, but um, it reminds me of my mother, and and I think that's what it is. So for me, I have a lot of personal attachment to just creating that. And when she was kind of at the end of her life here, that was kind of happening. And so, to me, that was very personal. So um, that's for me, that's what I really love how that turned out. It was a huge project. That was a lot of work, but yeah, that would be it for me.
And Scott, before I move on, just so people have context, how many people worked on that with you? How big is your crew, and how much time does it take to do something that size?
We worked on the drawings and the mock-ups. We do computer rendering. So um, David Blancas is my current computer rendering artist, and that might take say a week or two, depending on how many changes are made. Oftentimes when someone comes and talk about a mural, I can't get right on the job anyway. I have a wait list. And so that gives you time to think about it, and it gives you time to kick around ideas. So usually the design time takes about 2 weeks. And then you might make some changes. The building prep, that fluctuates depending on what that needs to, but when you start the mural, I think that one took me about, I want to say, about 2 months. So between 6 weeks, and it was getting pretty close. And then the last couple of weeks was kind of just tweaking it to where I liked it. That mural I worked on with John Neal from Des Moines and Cameron Neal, his son. Cameron worked with me here in the studio. And then I had Wyatt Siegel, who also still works with me here in the studio. And we just kind of compartmentalized it out. I tried to pick components that people could paint that it wouldn't necessarily matter if it was within the same style. So I kind of had my hands on a lot of the stuff that we needed to keep visually looking the same. But then if we had, say a fabric that was flowing that could be painted or rendered by somebody else in their style, it's a different material floating in the back. Cameron painted that. So, I had, there was three other guys that worked on it with me. And it was very manageable.
But do you have a masseuse on call? And what about a chiropractor? And how do you,
Yes, I do. I have a chiropractor. I
I
do.
mean, seriously, I mean,
But
what's the physical toll? I mean, that's kind of unbelievable.
yeah, you brought up the lifts earlier, Katie. That is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And Murals of More was was great. The SMID actually worked with me on that one, the downtown district. Um, I mean, I've even called the parkade at times and said, I'm having a hard time with the lift. These guys are a little bit short on a budget. Could we borrow a lift? There's people out there, they want this art to happen. They will help make it happen. They will say, hey, I know someone that has a lift. But that is huge. To have those lifts are very important, and the different style of lift depending on what you're doing. But yeah, I mean that job went really well. I really didn't have any issues. It was kind of tough because there's a parking lot there, which has pros and cons. A lot of people like to park their car in front of the mural and take a picture because it's approachable. But I also, while I was on the lift, someone
Oh,
backed into the lift.
Oh
I
no.
So that was a little bit, that was kind of scary when that happened. But other than
yeah.
that, I mean, it was pretty manageable. But you're right, it's very intense when you have something that big and you're dealing with elements of weather. You know, that job was just the heat. I mean, there was several days that, we're out there painting and it's over 100 degrees. And so you had to change your progress a little bit or process, and we had to have little containers, smaller containers to put a little paint in to mix our palettes in the containers instead of out in the open, and have them with little lids on them so that it took a little longer, but the paint was drying so fast and the brick was hot to the touch.
I was like, okay, why are they in little containers? Was the paint going to blow up? I have no idea. I mean, I have no idea what it takes to do. Like,
The
that makes a lot of sense. It's drying so fast, and then
Yeah, and
yeah.
the paint we used is made from minerals because it's going on brick. So it's an interesting um, material that we used on that, but it doesn't fade, so it'll last for
Um,
a long time.
Katie, what about you? What's something that you walk by or have in your mind's eye that you think, gosh, I just love that that's here or that I saw it?
Um, so because so much of what I do is about downtown revitalization and how art incorporates it, I am always so impressed with a neighboring community of Jefferson, Iowa. They have a bell tower that is, oh, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 stories tall and has an elevator. And so guests can go to the top of this bell tower and look out and see most of Greene County from the top of this tower. And
Wow.
it's right in the center of their town square. So they had the brilliant idea to put murals on the rooftops of their buildings so that when you are up in this bell tower looking down into their retail district, there are, I don't know if they have a dozen of them now, and it's the entire roof has an image on it. And two of the adjoining buildings, each of them had complementary murals so that one has a bird and the other one has a bird looking at him. But one's like a stork and one's a crane. But it is just such a out of the box thought to put murals on a rooftop.
Yeah.
But from a placemaking standpoint and a tourism standpoint, I just think it's phenomenal and that they did a great job in that thought process.
That is so cool. I'm creating a travel list. You guys have inspired me.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I gotta go see all these things. Josh, we're wrapping up here. Tell me, what do you walk by or have in your mind's eye that you're like, yep, love?
Salute to Service Herky by Scott Takis. No, he is it's my
Yeah.
but when you asked that question, I immediately thought of art that like moves me because of some historical significance that I like remembered, and I'm like, oh my God, that is like. And I remember there's an exhibit in Hungary. I went there for a wrestling event once, and it's called Shoes on the Danube, and it's like these uh, basically bronzed shoes of all people in different ages before they were killed at the Holocaust, and they were lined up on the river. And it's just these bronze sets of shoes, and it's a powerful public art moment. And there's a lot of those around the world, and those are the ones that really like stick to you. So I would say, there's a lot of them. It's hard to narrow down one, but
I think that's a beautiful example of art's role. That's where placemaking makes the most sense to me.
yeah.
Right. When it's really, it grounds you in a history and in a future. We're gonna get cut off here. I really appreciate this time. Thank you all for sharing and for the work that you do. And I'm excited to see what comes next out of your communities. So thanks everybody for tuning in with us, and again to ITC Midwest for sponsoring this conversation. And let's make more art. Let's do it.